Hi everyone, and welcome to A Stitch in Time. Today is Thursday, July 27th, 2017, and this is episode 26. My name is Carol, and my Ravelry username is Knits and Pearls. You can find the show notes for this and every episode on the blog at astitchintimepodcast.blogspot.ca, or you can also find them under the episode thread in the Ravelry group, and that can be found by searching A Stitch in Time podcast under the Groups tab. Come by and join in our Agatha Christie along, which is a very casual knit along, crochet along that I'm hosting in conjunction with reading my way through my Agatha Christie collection. And we've had a couple of recently posted finished objects there. A beautiful Orient Express crescent shawl by Cat 6 or Jackie. And also Maria, or her Ravelry name is Maria Wolf. She posted her finished Tea and Scandal socks. They're beautiful little shorty socks, pale pink speckled yarn with bright pink contrasting heels, toes, and cuffs. And her kids like them so much she's planning to make some for them too. So come by and check those out. And if you like, join in yourself. You can pick any project that you can somehow tie into Agatha Christie. There are lots of projects that have been specifically inspired by characters in her books or the titles of books or Agatha Christie herself. And I've listed all of those that I could find in the second posting in that thread. But if you can tie in a yarn colorway or a stitch pattern or a stitch pattern, any way you can do it, by all means. The rules are extremely relaxed. The whole purpose is just to build some community. So it's been a couple of weeks since I last podcasted. I was away last week, so I've got lots to talk about. I'm hoping to get it all under 1 hour. If not, I'm probably going to have to break the podcast into two parts, but I'll see what I can squeeze in. I have a couple of finished projects, lots of works in progress, a little bit about what I'm reading. I bought some things while on holidays, so I'll show those to you. And then I'll also bring you up to date on what's been happening in my life. And it's been a busy couple of weeks, so there's, like I say, lots to talk about this week. So let's just jump right into the knitting, because that's what you're here for the most, right? So I had lots of car knitting time. It was a driving holiday, so I finished this pair of socks. Oh, actually, that helps bring the color up pretty well. The yarn is Regia Design Line by K Facet in color 2903 Anthracite, which is a really good name for it. Anthracite's a type of coal, and so these socks are very dark. It's like a black kind of dark background with stripes of green and purple and burgundy. These stripes that look kind of royal blue on camera are actually more of a violet purple. So these socks, they're just a plain vanilla 72 stitch. There, that gives you maybe a better idea of all the different colors that are in there. These are for my brother-in-law for his birthday, which is in November. But since they're so dark, I thought I would work on them while the light was good. And so, yeah, those are my socks for Ed. Nothing too fancy, but I knit him a pair of socks for his birthday every year, and he seems to like that, so I'll keep doing it. So, yeah, another one to put away for in my to-gift pile. So there's project number 1. I also finished the socks that I was knitting for the Grocery Girls July Sock Bash, and I'm calling these my Lazy Hazy Days of Summer Socks because the colors I thought were reminiscent of green grass and blue skies and water and sunshine. The actual pattern's called Lazy Day Socks by Valerie Hobbs, and the yarn I used is Ancient Arts 3-ply fingering sock, and the colorway is Vancouver. And for those of you who don't know, I live in British Columbia, about an hour's drive east of Vancouver. So I'm going to bring these a little bit closer just so you can see the stitch pattern. Has a kind of a eyelet section alternating with, it almost looks like a cable, but actually it's a lace, there's no twisting involved. It's this cable-y appearance is achieved by doing yarn overs and decreases. And so, maybe hold one. I started on, there's a 32 row chart, and I started on row 17 on the second sock so that the socks would be mirror images of each other. And there you can see, so the cables are pointing away from each other and they look just like mirror images. So that's the yarn. In truth, is probably too busy for this pattern. It's hard to see the stitch pattern, but honestly, they were fun to knit. The colors were really fun to work with, and that's okay by me. So had a lot of fun knitting those. I haven't given any thought yet to August socks. I guess I should. It's almost the end of the month, but I'll give some thought to that in the next day or two and figure out what I'm going to do. So there you go. One last look at that project. Oh, by the way, if you haven't seen Valerie Hobbs, I wasn't familiar with her designs, but she has she's got a few sock patterns I really like, and she's got a number of sweater patterns, including several summer tees that I'm really tempted to cast one on. I have some DK weight cotton I've had forever, and I think that it would, they'd be very nice knit up in those. It's just a matter of finding time, which seems to be in short supply right now. So let's move on to works in progress. Pardon me. Still not quite over my cold. Still a bit of a cough, and as you can hear, a bit of a froggy voice. I'm going to go down there because I just dropped my yarn. So this first project, I thought I might be done by now, but I'm not, so bear with me for another week. It's the Sprites Venn Shawl by Helen Stewart, which is shawl number 2 in the Shawl Society 2 collection. And I'm knitting it in a lace weight yarn called Saldana, and it's by Fleece Artist in the Hemlock colorway. So here it is. It's grown a little bit since I saw you last. What I talked about last time is I thought, oh, maybe I'll finish the pattern repeat I was on and then just do the last 8 rows and call it done. But I took out my snow melt shawl, which is the same shape, semicircular shawl, half pie shawl, and I kind of laid it out against it, and I wanted it at least as big as the snow melt shawl because it's a nice big shawl to wrap up in. And I realized I still had a ways to go. And then I wanted it to, I didn't want this second to last section and the last section to be the same width. I thought it would look better proportionately if I made the bottom section 1.5 times the width of the second to last one. And so that's what I'm going to do, which means that I have 5 more pattern repeats to do. There are 4 more pattern repeats. They're 8 rows each. And then, is that right? I wrote notes. Yes, 4 more pattern repeats that are 8 rows long, and then the final 8 row final 8 rows in the shawl for the edging. So 40 more rows and counting. It takes quite a while. There's over 500 stitches in a row, so it takes quite a while. But you can see the feather and fan there. It's still keeping my interest, believe it or not. This fine yarn, but I've been enjoying working on the lace weight yarn. I don't always. And I like to see the colors come up, and you know, it'll take me as long as it takes me. I'm not in a rush. I'll do it, work on it as I kind of have time and such. It's all just knitting and purling, except there's 1 row of pattern that makes the feather and fan ripple. So I don't have to think too much when I do work on it. I just need fairly decent light. So there, I didn't plan to spend quite that long on this project because you've seen it so many times, but there you go. So I may not show it again till I'm finished. I'll see. Okay, next I'm also knitting on another shawl. This is for the Grocery Girls Canada 150 Make Along, and it's called the Sugar Maple Shawl. I did show this to you last week. I had begun it. That's the only picture there is. Hopefully you get a decent look. And as you can see, the designer is Angela Roberge. And I'm knitting that in another Fleece Artist yarn. This one is called Kid Dazzle in the red maple colorway. So I figure I've got, I think, 4 ways that I can enter this for the knit along. It's a Canadian designer. The design depicts a Canadian theme. It's a Canadian yarn with a very Canadian theme also, red maple, since we have red maple leaf on our Canadian flag. So, and I'm knitting it in my Canada-themed project bag that I sewed. So I've done quite a bit on this. I finished the first chart. I think that's what I had done last time. And then I've worked my way through chart B 6 times, and then I'm on about halfway through the last chart. So hold that up, whoops. So you can see it's kind of a maple leaf design at the top, followed by an eyelet section, and then the border, not sure if I can show that very well, it's also goes back into the maple leaf design. There you can see the V of the leaf there. So it's coming along nicely. I'm enjoying working on this. I like how it's knitting up. The color on screen, I keep saying it's a little bit darker than what shows. This is almost a cherry red, winey red. On the screen it looks more true red, but it is a bit deeper than that. You might be wondering what that line is for. Now I know some of you are new knitters, so you may not have come across the term lifeline before, so I thought I would take a minute to explain that. When you're knitting something, most often it seems to be lace knitting, because that's something that's difficult to tear back or pick back. You can put in what's called a lifeline through a row of stitches where you know the stitch count is correct or the pattern is correct. And then if you needed to take your shawl back, rip it back, you could just take the work off the needles and just pull your yarn, and this line of, in this case, it's dental floss, would stop because it's holding all those stitches in place, and so you couldn't rip back past that. And then you would thread your needle back through this row of stitches and be able to begin again. A lot of needles, a lot of interchangeable needles have, see if I can show you, they'll have a hole, let me see, they'll have a hole on their needles that they use to tighten the points onto the cable. Words, they're failing me. And what you can do is, before you start knitting the row that you want to put your lifeline in, you can thread some fine yarn, or in my case, like I say, I used unwaxed dental floss, or thread. You can thread that through this hole and leave a tail on it, and then knit your row and just kind of gradually pull the thread through the stitches. And that's a really easy way of putting a lifeline in. Otherwise, if you didn't have that option, you could thread a sewing needle or a fine yarn needle and just thread your thread or yarn or dental floss just through the stitches that are on the needle. This is by far easier to do it. Now, the reason that I put a lifeline in, I don't usually on lace knitting. I'm a pretty confident lace knitter, and also usually can find my way back if I need to rip back. But in this case, I wasn't sure how many repeats of chart B that I was going to want to do. The pattern indicates to work until you have about 60% of your yarn left, and then do the final chart. And So I did work through chart B. I think I did it 7 times. I can't remember exactly. I did it a number of times. And then I tried to work chart C, but the numbers didn't work out. I had stitches, more chart than I had stitches for. And so looking through different people's project notes for this pattern, I found a suggestion that perhaps when you do chart B, you have to do it in groups of 3, in multiples of 3. So you either have to knit 3 repeats of chart B, or 6 repeats, or 9 repeats. Otherwise, there's not the correct number of stitches to make chart C work. You have to increase, basically it comes down to in increments of 18. So I believe I had done 7, in which case it didn't work. And then also people found they had quite a bit of yarn left over at the end, and suggested that perhaps what the designer meant was to work until you had used up about 60% of your yarn, and then use about 40% to knit the final border. So because I wasn't sure how many repeats of chart B I was going to get, I put a lifeline in after completing, I think it ended up being after 6 repeats of chart B. Now, if I get to the end and find I have tons of yarn left over, I may take back to there and work 3 more repeats of chart B and then work chart C. On the other hand, I might not. I might just live with a little bit of yarn left over. I like a shawl that's kind of a scarf size anyway, so if this ends up being sort of on the small size, that would be okay too. But yeah, it's kind of another thing about the pattern that I'm not really liking is that the charts aren't the lines on the charts aren't numbered, nor are the stitches. So you just kind of have to keep, usually I would keep track, row 1, row 3, row 5, and in this case, they're not marked at all. So I find that a bit strange. It's no matter, I can work with it, but also kind of disappointed in the lack of explanation that, yes, it's fine to do chart B till you have a certain percentage of yarn, but it's a pretty important step to say that you have to increase in increments of 18, or in other words, do 3 sets of chart B, or pardon me, either 3 or 6 or 9 repeats of chart B in order for the numbers to work out. Because I ended up having to take back, it's time and your valuable knitting time, and thankfully somebody had made note of that, or I might not have known how many repeats to knit. I thankfully saw that and then realized, okay, if I take it back 1 repeat, then it wasn't so bad. But anyway, I know that's sometimes the case with self-published patterns, but I don't know, I guess I always feel like if you're paying for something, those kinds of quirks I think should be worked out or made evident. Just my personal opinion. Okay, decide where I'm going to put this. Pardon me. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Yes, pardon me. I'm going to have a little sip of water. Okay, so again, lots of car knitting, meant lots of sock knitting this week. So I showed you my Blind Venus socks last week, which I think I had just done the cuff in a few rows, knitting it under this Opal Hunter Twassers colored 750 called Blind Venus, and it's named for this this work of art here. And pardon me. So I managed to complete the legs and added in a complementary heel. So I used West Yorkshire Spinner's Signature 4-ply for the heel in color 510 Cayenne Pepper. And I guess on screen these look a little bit more orangey than this red, but actually in real life they're pretty similar. These have been really fun to knit because the yarn is so interesting. You can see this section here has some variegation that runs through it, and then this section's multicolored too, and this one. So they've been really fun to knit, and no stripe is really, really long, so it's fun to just kind of see them progress. And then of course once you get the heel in, it seems to go really fast from there. So again, one more look. Woo! So now these will be relegated back to, now that the heels are done, back to TV and travel knitting. So I'll work on them whenever. There's no deadline or anything for these, so just work on them when I feel like. Okay, and the last project I wanted to show you that I'm working on are my felted clogs. Pardon me. It's a Fiber Trends pattern by Bev Gillespie's. And I have made, I don't know how many pairs of these I've made over the years. Many, 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 many. And I personally wear these slippers, and I wear them around the house all the time when it's not hot out. And so I need to make myself a new pair. Oh, probably every year to 2 years, I guess. Oh, I meant to bring in my finished one. And so I'm going to put this on hold. That'll help break up this podcast into different sections to download anyway. So I'm going to pause, and then I will be right back to talk a little bit more about these. Okay, I'm back. So before I go further, I'll just get the business part of this over with and tell you that I'm using Peyton's Classic Wool Worsted, and I am using color 230, which is bright red, and color 77251, which is light gray marl. So here I have my first finished one. They remind me of sock monkeys, which is why I chose these colors. So this is completed slipper, obviously pre-felting. So as you can see, I've knit the sole out of the red and also the contrasting cuff, and then the upper in the light gray marl. Now this is actually a double sole. You knit one sole and work your way up into the upper, and then add the contrasting, or if it doesn't have to be contrasting. I almost always make them contrasting because it makes it more interesting. Then you do the cuff, and then you knit a second sole and you join it with, it's almost like doing 3 needle bind off. You join it around the outside. And before you do that, you sew up the sole down the center here. And then you put them in the washing machine and you felt them. And then they shrink down to this. So this gives you an idea of how much they will shrink. Kind of fun. These are in terrible shape. They have holes through the cuff. As you can see, I do extend the life of my slippers by adding this slipper bottom. They're sold by Fiber Trends also. And they're suede patches. Now what I do is I glue them on with a fabric glue. Actually, it's right down here, so I'm just going to reach pardon me, into my cupboard here. This is what I use. It's called Fabric Tack. I buy it in, I think I got this in my local fabric store, but I believe I've also bought this type of thing in Michael's, if I'm not mistaken. And it does say right on it, I believe it's for leather and bonds fabrics, lace, leather, wood, and trims. So that's why I use it, because it does work for both the leather and the wool. Now slipper bottoms come with yarn to sew them on with. In my experience, the yarn does not last very long. I usually will glue them, and yes, I do have to re-glue these several times over the period that I use them. So I think these I did about 2 years ago, and I've probably re-glued them maybe 2 or 3 times, so it's not too bad. But as you can see, they do come, this one's actually folded right over. They do come away from it, but the last pair I did for my son, I glued and sewed. I thought I'd give the sewing another chance, and I thought that might help. And he said that the wool has kind of worn out now. I think it was at Christmas that I gave them to him. But he did feel like it helped this sole stay adhered to the wool for a longer period of time. So it didn't take a long time to sew them on. So I think that's what I'm going to do for this pair. Pardon me again. So anyway, yeah, there's the first one, and I thought I would just give you a very quick overview. I've cast on the second. Now, the pattern tells you to work the sole going back and forth, and then just sewing up this little section here before you sew the sole together. I've joined mine in the round right away, and I work, there are, every second row is if you were working them as written, every second row would be a plain knit row. So I just purl those rows, and that's just one more little seam I don't have to sew up. So when I cast my slippers on, I always leave enough of a tail in order to sew this part up. And then after you attach the second sole, you kind of do a whip stitch or a running stitch up the center and between the two soles, so that they hold together when felting. See, these don't come apart. See, they're attached in the middle. And so when I cast on for the second sole, I leave enough to sew it up here and enough to do the running stitches. And again, it just means less joining yarn, and it just kind of streamlines the process. So what I've done here, this is just row 1. You can see it looks like a lot of knitting for just one row. And that's because on the first round, and then if you're doing a men's size on the first and the third round, you're working short rows in order to shape the sole. So here's the back of the slipper, and this is the part that's going to be sewn together. This is actually the wrong side, so I'll show you the right side. So once I'm finished, this is what gets sewn together. That's this part. And so, because when you finish the sole, then you're instructed to join in the round and work this whole upper. So I figure, why not join in the round right to begin with? And like I say, less sewing, and it's all kind of good to go. So I know a couple of you were asking about these. I hope that's given you a little bit more information on how they're constructed, and with the soles, what I do for them to not only make them a little bit more or less slippery, but also mainly to extend the life of it, of the slipper. Because you can imagine, if you're just walking on fabric all the time, there's only so much that fabric can hold up to. And so putting on this suede sole, it does definitely extend the life. Now, I'm not quite sure. I must have been walking on my heel on this part. I really don't know, because they're both the same. They're kind of worn out there. Most of the time that's not the case. It's more right here. So it's just obviously the way they turned out. When you felt them, like both slippers are the same. There isn't a left or a right. But then you start wearing them and you will form a left and a right just with the way your feet fit in them. This is going to be another bit of an experiment. The last fall we got a front-loading washing machine. My first pair of felted slippers did not felt very well at all. I kind of tweaked my method with the second pair, and that worked out a lot better. So what I will do is the same thing for this, is I'm going to alternate between a hot cycle in the washing machine and take them out and dunk them in cold water, put them back in the hot wash, and that helps the little what are they called, scales on the wool. It shocks them open or closed, and it's these scales that all kind of tangle together, attach themselves to each other, sort of like burrs attach themselves to a piece of clothing or an animal's fur. That's kind of what happens with felting. All these little scales grab each other, and that's what makes the yarn felt. Or technical term for this is fulling, not felting. But definitely I will give you an update. I'll show them when they're all finished, and I'm hoping that they turn out well. It's definitely a bit more of a challenge than doing them in the top loader, because I could just stop that cycle and take them out and check them whenever I wanted to. And so these, it's just a little bit trickier, but I'm hoping to sort of perfect the process, because like I say, this is something I've made oodles of times for myself and for gifts, and I hope that I can continue making them properly. What am I reading? Not much, actually. I haven't been doing much reading lately. Last time I showed you Death in the Air, or it's also known as Death in the Clouds. So I finished that, and honestly I thought the ending was kind of lame and far-fetched. Whatever. Had me fooled, I'll tell you that much. And then, because I think I said I thought I knew where it was going, and I didn't. I guess Chrissy, she almost always gets me. And then I realized this had been tucked in my knitting bag, so I should have read this one before this one, because this was written in 1934 and this in 1935. But I goofed, so now I'm working backwards. So Murder in 3 Acts, and it was originally published under that name in the US, and it's also called 3-Act Tragedy, probably I think in the UK. I still don't understand why they're published with different names, but as you can see, I literally have just started. I think I've read the second chapter, and this I know there's at least 2 murders in it, or deaths, murders. One has just occurred, and so haven't really got too much into it, but it's a Hercule Poirot mystery, and he is currently at a house party where this first death takes place, and according to the back of the book, he attends another one in the future that has the same guests, and another similar death takes place. So then obviously there's something funny going on here, so just getting into this one. So while on holidays, I visited a yarn shop that I've been to before in Kelowna, BC, and did some yarn shopping. So I'll show you what I got. One of the main purposes, or one of the main goals going into the shop, was to see if I could find 3 skeins of yarn that would work for the So Faded sweater. I'm still intent on making that. And so I had some help. The young woman was very helpful. So I came up with these 2, and you can see they've got a lot of similar colors. This one sort of minus the purple, so those fade well. And then again, like I've already found, finding the 3rd skein is the toughest. And we did come up with this as a 3rd. But I realized, like, one thing I didn't like about my first So Faded that I attempted was how a sort of a semi-solid yarn worked with the variegated. And so I'm second guessing this one, but I do have the skein in my stash that, of course, with the lighting, They might look too similar, and even they are rather similar, but there's this one here I have already that has sort of more, some turquoise in it that I thought might be a better combination. And it's very subtle. That's kind of what I want. I realized the crazy wasn't for me. This is not probably going to come off as variegated, any of them, as they really are in true life. But I think that's the combo I'm going to go for. This one seems to have been reskeined so that the color is quite well distributed, so you can't really see all the varied colors in there. It has turquoise and blue and some purple. On this screen it looks much more tonal, and there is variation in it. Same with this one. Woo! Yarn down. See, again, that one, it's very hard to tell, but there's a lot more variegation than is showing. A lot more purple in it. So that's what I think my So Fade is going to end up with. And I think, oh, what I start to say, this I think has been already being reskeined. I think I will reskein these or wind them because I have a feeling they'll come out more like this as far as the distribution of color. And then I'll have a better sense of how they're going to look knit up, I think. So I guess I should tell you what these are. So these two are Malabrigo Makita. I think that's how you say it. And this one is 889 Musas, M-U-S-A-S. That's the one with more of the purples in it. And then this is color 883 called Cherry. That can be up. There you go. And again, doesn't really show quite as much as I'd like to show the variation. This one is a Madeline Tosh Merino Light in Begonia Leaf. And there's variation. This one actually is coming up quite well on screen, the colors. And then this one actually also happens to be the one I'm going to sub in, is also Tosh Merino Light in Odyssey. So cross fingers that I have found the solution for that sweater, because it's one that I just keep thinking about and really want to knit. So while we were looking at different combinations for the sweater, we came across this skein, and it just leaped out at me, and I knew I was going to buy it whether it went with anything or not. I just love those colors. And that's Alegria by Manos del Uruguay. And this is color A9998 called Antica. So this might be a pair of socks. I've done a couple of pairs of socks in Alegria, and Alegria. And I really like it. It's a nice soft yarn, and it kind of stripes up a little bit if you get the right combination of stitches and stitch pattern. It knits up really almost stripy, which I like. And then one other thing I didn't feel like I could leave without was Fleece Artist has done this series for Canada's 150th birthday, their National Park collection. And this is on something called Merino Slim. So it's another single ply merino yarn like the Tosh Merino Light and the Makita. And this one is for Banff, Alberta. Banff is a fairly, I think, well-known place even outside of Canada. It's a town in the Rocky Mountains, and it's a national park. Banff and Jasper, Yoho, and Kootenay National Park are all kind of border each other and go through the Rocky Mountains. And I've been there a number of times. It's a place that has lots of happy memories. I thought it would get, there's one for every province and territory, and the one for BC was, it said, was Guayhanas, and it said moss draped cedar, mist, and memories of totems, meaning totem poles, but they didn't have it there. And I think the colors in this probably suit me better anyway, I'm going to see what they say about this one. Moraine Lake, turquoise, Rocky Mountains, and alpine forests. So you've probably all heard of Lake Louise. Lake Louise is in Banff National Park. And actually Moraine Lake that they refer to is quite nearby there too. And it's this turquoisey, beautiful blue. So there, that's my acquisitions. As far as yarn goes, my life, or life in general, it's been really busy. When I last spoke to you, the next day my husband was taking off for a fishing trip with work, and he was gone for 4 days, and luckily he came back with some salmon. Last time he had brought salmon, halibut, and some rock cod. This time he was only lucky enough to catch salmon, but he brought quite a bit back, so we're well stocked for a while, and also able to give some to some family members. So it's delicious. We had some for dinner last night. I'm trying something new. The first few times I prepare it, I'm going to try a different recipe every time. So last night I did something called baked salmon with garlic and Dijon. So I'm going to link to that recipe. I found it really good, and it was very simple. Just mix Dijon and parsley, garlic, olive oil, salt and pepper, and I feel like there's one more thing that I'm missing. I can't remember. And you just mix it up and basically brush it onto your salmon fillets, pardon me, and bake them. Very simple, very flavorful. It was really good. I forgot to mention, when my husband was fishing, he said there were humpback whales they saw several times while they were out in their boats. And in one case, there was a mom and a calf, and he said it was almost like the mom was teaching the calf how to breach. That's when they come out of the water and go back in. And so he got some pictures. I've zoomed in a little bit on them so you can get a better look, but they were quite close to the boat. So I'm going to include some pictures of the whales too that he had taken on his fishing trip. So while Cameron was away, a lot of times when he's away for a few days, I'll go get Indian food for takeout. But this time I actually went to the restaurant with my daughter. It was her birthday a week later, and we weren't going to be here for it, so I took her out for dinner, and she's one of the people in my life that also likes Indian food. So we had a nice dinner and then went for a long walk along the river. So it was a really nice evening. And then when my husband came back, he worked for a day, and then the next day we left for a little mini holiday up to the Okanagan, which is a wine producing and fruit growing region of British Columbia, inland from the coast. And so we kind of made our way up leisurely on Thursday and stopped for lunch, and then visited a few wineries as we kind of wound our way up to the next town for our hotel. And then we the next day we worked our way along the what's called the Naramata Bench. Penticton is where we stayed that night, for those of you who know the region. So we stayed in Penticton the first night, and then did the Naramata Bench wineries on Friday. So we did lots of wine tasting and lots of wine buying. We have a tradition every Friday night. We do Appy Night, when we have a nice bottle of wine and appetizers for dinner. So we kind of built up our collection, and we have enough now to last us for many, many, many weeks. But they're really like those wines. We've visited Naramata, that area before, and have really liked their wines, or a lot of the wines. So we did that, and then made our way that sort of late afternoon, evening up to Kelowna, which is the next town, our city that's north of Penticton. And we stayed there for 3 nights. So the next day we did the Myra Canyon bike tour. I had talked about that on my last podcast, and I was a little bit nervous, hoping that I would be able to ride a bike again, because I hadn't for probably 10 or 15 years. I don't think I've been on a bike in since then. But as it was, you know, that expression, like riding a bike, really does hold true, and thankfully it did. The trail is the route of an old railway, Kettle Valley Railway. That section of the railway was came to an end in 1989. Pardon me. And they've turned it into this trail, and kept there's I think 18 trestles and 2 tunnels that you go through in a 12.5 kilometer stretch. And then we turn around at that point. That's what our tour included, and came back. So we were picked up at our hotel, and then they took us up there, fitted us out with our bikes, sent us on our way, and then we had about 4 hours to complete the route. It took us about 3.5, and that's with lots of stopping, taking pictures, stop for a snack, etc. So, and there's little signs along the way to read. So it was a very leisurely route, and not difficult. It was, even though you're obviously have a grade. I think the grade is, I think it's climbing on your way there and then downhill on your way back. But really, it's such a slight grade. It never felt like work. So I'll include some pictures at the end of the podcast to show you that, because it was beautiful scenery. It's up very high. You can overlook Kelowna and Okanagan Lake from up there. And that site actually was, that area was the site of a wildfire in 2003, and it destroyed, I think, 15, I want to say 15 of the 18 trestles. And they've since been all rebuilt for the purposes of the trail, and so it's been it's just a great place to visit. Beautiful scenery and just an interesting history to the area. Lots of wildflowers. Was really, really enjoyable. And the weather wasn't too bad. It was overcast and a bit of a breeze, because that's a very hot region of BC, but the temperatures were really good. So that was that was awesome. And then that evening we met up with some of my husband's staff. Were coming up for the next day. There was a golf tournament for the staff in that of his company in that region, and the next day we did had a lazy morning. It was really nice because the golf tournament didn't start till 2, so we had a nice lazy morning, and then we headed to the golf course. It was definitely hotter that day, but there was a nice breeze blowing. We did not golf well. We actually came in last. We didn't do well. It took us a long time, but we had a really nice day. And we got a prize out of being last. So, you know, we can't beat that. And then everybody also got a door prize. So that was really nice. It was a lot of fun. And then we headed home the next day, took our time, and we went up just a little bit north of town. There was a place someone told us about called the Jamboree, where they make their own jams, and they serve breakfast and lunch, and they said it was really good. So we started out there with the late breakfast, I guess brunch you'd call it, and bought some jams and some honey, and then headed home. We visited another winery along the way, just because it's one or I guess a couple along the way, and that we had heard about. And so yeah, we took our time, and we didn't get into Chilliwack here till about 7 o'clock, and my husband had a ball game at 8 o'clock. So it was unpack the car, run in the house, quick change for him, and out the door. We'd grabbed some supper from a drive-through on our way home, so at least we had eaten. But yeah, it was kind of a long day, and then of course he was back to work the next day. So yeah, not quite long enough. Beautiful holiday. So when I spoke to you last, I told you that the big news in BC at the time was wildfires. And sadly, that's still the case. There are, currently, I was looking at the stats before I recorded, there's currently 133 wildfires burning, 23 they call of note. And that means that they obviously are bigger and need more attention. Now, BC is almost completely forested, And so it's a prime in hot, dry summer. It's a prime place for wildfires, for forest fires. And during the summer months with the hot days and then cooler nights, we often will have thunderstorms, and so with lightning strikes. And then, of course, too, with people, either accidentally or sadly, in one case, apparently purposely, have set fires. And so, forest fires, that's a really natural way for the forest to regenerate itself by getting rid of the forest. The fire will go through and kill off or burn up a lot of the deadfall and old trees, and then that provides light and nutrition in the soil for new species to take root. And all that's well and good until you have people involved. And this year, unfortunately, a number of the fires that are burning are affecting communities. And so we've never had, I don't think, a year like this before where we've had so many evacuations. One place called Williams Lake, 10,000 people got evacuated on July 15th. And I actually just saw, just before I recorded, that they are actually being allowed back in town and will be on evacuation alert. There are still fires burning in the area, but the immediate danger is over. And one of the main reasons that place got evacuated is there was a fire burning north of town that was threatening highway access. And with that many people, you need more than one way out of town. And so they took a precaution of evacuating. And further south from there is 100 Mile House. And that had been evacuated, I think, around the same time or maybe just before. I think maybe at the time I recorded it had been. And then next comes Clinton, and that's south of there, and that's where my mom lives. That's about, well, it used to be called 47 Mile House. It was, the route was the route to the gold fields, and so they had different points along the way that were for roadhouses, and so they used to be 47 Mile, and then there's 100 Mile House. So 53 miles, that gives you an idea of how far that is. And then south of there, about 25 miles or 40 kilometers, is Cache Creek. So when I spoke to you 2 weeks ago, Cache Creek had been evacuated. The fire, one of the fires had started near there. And so my mom lives right in the middle of, there was the Ashcroft Reserve Fire, they were calling it now, called the Elephant Hill Fire. That was in the Ashcroft Cache Creek area, south of her. And then there was the fire near 100 Mile House, which was north of her. So where she lives in Clinton was actually cut off one day for sure. All the routes out of town were closed. And even with some being open, it was very hard to get supplies in. So she said their gas tanks had run dry, and some of the groceries were out. So they were, at some point, did get supplies in and replenish all that. But even though she was in between the two places where these large fires were burning, I wasn't that concerned because, as I say, she was 25 plus miles north of one of them and 50-ish miles south of the other. But as it turned out, the day after I podcasted, the fire that had been burning to the south had increased significantly in size because of winds, and all of a sudden where my mom lives got put on evacuation alert. And I was talking to her that night. She and her friend had already planned that if the town went on alert, that they were going to leave because neither of them drive, and they're in their 80s and don't have family. Well, that's not true. Helen has family that lives close by, but my mom doesn't, and we couldn't get in to go get her. So she just wanted to be out and come down and stay in our area to be safer. So I was talking to her on the Saturday night. They had planned to leave the next morning, and then she went, looked out the window, I guess, and all of a sudden she said, the sky is just red above the ridge, and she hadn't seen it like that before. They'd had smoke in town, and they'd seen smoke clouds, but nothing like that. So we were glad that she did leave the next day. I guess there were about 4 or 5 cars that left together, and they had a police escort along the closed highway south to Cache Creek, and then made their way to a place called Kamloops, is where the main evacuation center was, pardon me, for that region. So then my sister drove up to Kamloops and picked up my mom there and brought her down to where we live. So we're looking after her here. So yeah, that fire, her town is still on alert, although thankfully it hasn't had to be evacuated, although parts of it, surrounding area have, and there have been homes lost, and it's now grown. That's the largest fire in BC now. It's grown to 65,000 hectares, which, you know, you just think about the size of that. To travel more than 25, 30 miles is crazy. And then, of course, it's out this way, too. Where she lives, there's a ridge that runs sort of north-south through town, and the fire is currently on the east side of that ridge, which is the good side for where she lives. Although, as I say, there's people in outlying areas that are evacuated, are in danger, and that have lost homes, sadly. And it's also a ranching community, ranching country, so livestock are involved. That's really a concern, of course, for the ranchers there, for that's their livelihood. So it's crazy. And then just as they're thinking they're getting a handle on it, yesterday it broke through the fire guards in a couple of places, and because of wind, and so it's an ongoing effort. Having said that, my niece is supposed to be getting married next weekend up at our vacation property. And they had made a plan B, and then when things looked like they were settling down, they decided to go ahead with plan A, which is to have the wedding at the cabin. And so that's the plan. Hoping everything... our summer property is outside of Clinton, about 17 kilometers, 10 miles, and it's west of town. So we're well away from the fire. And the village, the way it's set up and the way the fire is, it seems to be safe. And the highways are open, and so it does seem as though everything should be okay. So just cross fingers, toes, arms, legs, that everything can go off as planned. So on another note, this time, 33 years ago today, I was making the final preparations for my wedding. We got married July 28th, 1984, so that tomorrow is our 33rd anniversary, and so we're going to go have dinner at our favorite restaurant and celebrate, and then we get to spend the rest of the weekend at the ballpark. It's the year-end ball tournament this weekend, and then that'll be it for the year till next April. So that's how we'll be spending the next few days. My sister that lives in Toronto and her husband are going to be arriving next Thursday to come for the wedding. So we'll pick them up at the airport. They'll stay overnight with us before we head up to the summer cabins on Friday. So I'm hoping to get a chance to record before then. If not, I'll put a note in the show notes and in the Ravelry group. But if all goes as planned, I should be good to go. So that's enough yakking for one day. I think I've talked your ear off, and I'm hoping to keep this. I hope this fits in under an hour so that you can get everything. Otherwise, like I said, I might break it into 2 parts. I'm going to include some pictures from, as I said, of the whales, and also some pictures from our trip. So some beautiful views over Okanagan Lake and the vineyards, and some of the pictures from Myra Canyon and the bike ride. So enjoy, have a good week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye now.